The traffic was unbearable, and every red light felt like a personal insult. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept checking the time, my stomach twisting with anxiety. I knew I was late, but I had promised myself I would make it in time, despite the chaos of work and errands that had piled up like mountains that morning. Then my phone buzzed and I saw his message, "Where are you? Mom's waiting for her present." And my chest tightened. That wasn't just a reminder. It was a scolding disguised as urgency. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I could already hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and most piercingly, his voice. "Finally, took you long enough," he bellowed as I stepped out of the car, his tone louder than it needed to be. His eyes scanned the small crowd of relatives and neighbors, a smug grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mom's been waiting for her present." My face burned. I wanted to disappear into the asphalt beneath my feet. My husband, the man I had loved, the man I trusted, was humiliating me in front of everyone, and he did it with such practiced ease, like this wasn't the first time. I forced a smile, careful to keep my voice steady as I muttered, "I'm sorry traffic was," but he cut me off with a sharp laugh, a sound meant to mock, not amuse. Traffic, always an excuse, isn't it? His words stung worse than any slap. I could feel the eyes of family members darting between us, some with sympathy, most with silent judgment. As I entered the living room, my mother-in-law rose from her chair, a warm smile plastered on her face, blissfully unaware of the storm. She welcomed me, hugged me, praised my dress, my hair, my smile, and all the while my husband hovered nearby, smirking like a judge savoring a guilty verdict. I had tried to be patient. I had tried to forgive the little humiliations over the years, his sarcastic remarks at dinners, his dismissive comments about my family, the way he subtly reminded me that my efforts were never quite enough, but today was different. Today, in front of everyone I cared about, or thought I cared about, he had stripped away every shred of composure I had left. I handed my mother-in-law her gift with a trembling hand. She thanked me, oblivious to the tension crackling between my husband and me like electricity. I could feel the heat of my frustration rising, clawing its way up my throat, demanding to be released. But I swallowed it. I had learned long ago that losing my temper in public played right into his hands. And so I smiled, I laughed when appropriate, I clinked glasses and said polite things, but behind that smile a storm was brewing. I could almost hear it, the slow, deliberate hiss of revenge whispering in my mind. I would not let this go. I would not forget the way he had humiliated me, the way he had made me feel small in my own marriage. As the candles were lit on the cake and everyone sang happy birthday, I looked at him out of the corner of my eye. His smug expression, so full of self-satisfaction, was the final spark. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. He would pay for this not with anger, not with screaming, but with the slow, sweet satisfaction of seeing him undone in a way he could never anticipate. Because this wasn't just about a birthday or a gift, this was about respect, this was about dignity, and he had just handed me the perfect reason to reclaim both. After the cake was cut and the laughter settled into polite conversation, I retreated to the corner of the room, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. Every smile I offered felt like a mask I was forcing onto my face, a mask my husband had helped me perfect over the years, cheerful, compliant, unremarkable. Inside, though, my emotions churned like a stormy sea. I watched him as he leaned back in his chair, regaling the older relatives with exaggerated stories of his childhood triumphs, stories that had been polished for public consumption, but always left me feeling invisible. He laughed at his own jokes before anyone else had the chance to, the sound grating against my nerves. I forced myself to take a slow sip of tea, careful not to reveal the trembling of my hands. My mother-in-law, radiant in her silk blouse and pearls, glowed with satisfaction as she opened gifts, each present accompanied by effusive thanks and compliments. She turned to me and smiled warmly. "You remembered the scarf. It's perfect." She had no idea that the real tension in the room wasn't about gifts at all. The rest of the evening was a delicate dance of smiles, polite conversation, and careful navigation around my husband's subtle jabs. He didn't raise his voice again, but his presence was a constant reminder of how easily he could humiliate me. A small comment here, a sarcastic remark there, enough to keep me off balance, to make me question my own worth in this room full of people who adored him. It was during one of these brief moments of solitude that I began to notice details I had never paid attention to before. The way he arranged his watch just so on his wrist, the subtle nervous tick he tried to hide when someone mentioned money, the way my mother-in-law flinched slightly whenever he praised himself in her presence, vulnerabilities, blind spots, opportunities. I realized then that I had been playing by his rules for too long, letting him dictate the terms of my own dignity. But if I observed carefully, if I kept my mask in place while gathering information, I could turn the tables. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. Not the thrill of confrontation, not the satisfaction of shouting or anger, but the quiet, deliberate thrill of control. The evening wore on, and I played my role flawlessly. I complimented his achievements. I laughed at his jokes. I praised the food, the decorations, the careful thought my mother-in-law had put into her party. All the while, I catalogued every weakness, every subtle crack in their armor, every careless comment, every hint of arrogance, every unspoken expectation they had of me. I filed them away in my mind, storing them like carefully labeled weapons. By the time guests began to leave, I had formed the outlines of a plan. Not a reckless, impulsive plan born of rage, but a patient, methodical one. It would require time, observation, and subtlety. It would require keeping up the mask while the pieces fell into place. As I walked to the car, my husband beside me, I let him think I was exhausted, worn out, grateful for the party, harmless. But beneath the calm exterior, my mind was alight with strategy. Today had been his performance, his victory. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, I would begin my own, and when I did, it would be a quiet, devastating reckoning. The hum of the engine and the dim streetlights did nothing to calm the fire within me. I had worn the mask today, but I had also learned that I could see everything clearly behind it. And the clearer I saw, the sweeter my eventual revenge would be. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the curtains felt unusually sharp, cutting across the remnants of last night's anger like a warning. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the bitter warmth, and let my mind replay the previous evening in meticulous detail. Every laugh he forced, every smug glance he cast, every subtle jab he delivered, none of it would go unanswered. But this time, I wasn't going to retaliate in the heat of anger. That would be too easy, too obvious, too fleeting. No, my revenge would be deliberate, sweet, and satisfying in a way that left him questioning everything he thought he controlled. I had begun to see him not as the man I loved, but as a flawed actor performing for an audience, unaware that the real power now rested in my hands. The first step was observation. I watched him closely, noting the routines, habits, and predictable reactions he revealed even in casual moments. I discovered that he had a weakness for social recognition, a hunger for admiration that often made him reckless. He bragged to colleagues about minor achievements at work, fishing for praise, and left traces of his secrets in off-hand comments. These were tiny fissures in the armor of arrogance he wore so confidently, and I intended to exploit every single one. Next, I began planting subtle seeds. During breakfast, I praised him quietly but strategically, luring him into overconfidence. "You handled that presentation brilliantly yesterday," I said, emphasizing words that would encourage him to boast again. He beamed, unaware that his pride would soon be his undoing. I also began cultivating alliances, carefully choosing friends and relatives who had quietly observed his arrogance over the years. Conversations laced with casual hints of his overconfidence were enough to make others notice patterns they had previously ignored. I did not push, did not argue, simply nudged the pieces into alignment, like a chess player preparing for a checkmate. But the most delicate part of my plan was the emotional one. I allowed him to believe that nothing had changed, that I was still the same compliant, patient wife he thought he controlled. I smiled, laughed, even agreed with him in small ways that concealed the storm brewing beneath the surface. Every nod, every gentle touch was a thread in the web I was weaving, binding him to a world in which he could not anticipate my moves. The next few days became a dance of precision. I listened more than I spoke, observed more than I acted. Every slip of arrogance, every boast, every self-important comment was catalogued and filed. I found delight in the smallest discoveries, the way he reacted defensively when a minor error at work was mentioned, the subtle irritation he displayed when someone else received praise he believed was deserved for himself. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture, the perfect moments to strike, the perfect vulnerabilities to exploit, and the perfect emotional blows that would leave him reeling without ever suspecting me. This was not just revenge, it was artistry. I was not seeking destruction, I sought revelation. I wanted him to see at last the consequences of his arrogance, the way he had humiliated and undermined me, and the quiet, unstoppable power I now held. As I closed my notebook, which contained carefully noted observations and ideas, I felt a thrill of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The storm I had promised myself after that birthday party was no longer a vague thought or a distant desire. It was a plan, a living, breathing strategy that would unfold with exquisite timing. And when it did, the satisfaction would be immeasurable, sweet, and unforgettable. Absolutely. Here's chapter 4 of your story, around 600 words, delivering the climactic sweet revenge with emotional payoff and subtle satisfaction. Chapter 4. The sweet, quiet revenge. It began on a seemingly ordinary morning. The sun spilled lazily across the kitchen, and I moved through the motions of making breakfast with calm precision, my husband, oblivious to the storm, brewing behind my serene facade. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, smug in the comfort of his perceived superiority. He had no idea that every smile I offered, every compliment I whispered, had been a careful step in the plan I had cultivated for weeks. The first move came subtly, almost imperceptibly. At dinner that evening, I praised one of his minor achievements at work, but with a carefully planted caveat. "It's impressive, but I wonder what your team would think if they knew about the mistakes in the last report." I let my words linger, innocent in tone but heavy in implication. His smile faltered. He laughed nervously, attempting to brush it off, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. Over the next few days, small cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed image he projected. Friends who once ignored his arrogance now raised gentle questions, poking holes in the stories he told about his achievements. Colleagues began to notice inconsistencies, and he found himself fumbling explanations, desperate to maintain his flawless persona. All of this unfolded while I maintained the mask, patient, supportive, untouchable. Every slip he made felt like a private victory. Every doubt he could not dispel was a triumph quietly celebrated in my heart. The turning point came one evening at a family gathering. My mother-in Law, who had always smiled indulgently at his antics, witnessed the first public faltering of his self-assured veneer. He stumbled over an exaggerated story, and the subtle hints I had sown were recognized by others in the room. I watched as confusion flickered across his face, then panic, then that slow realization that he had lost control of the narrative. I remained composed, offering smiles and quiet reassurances, all while the pieces fell perfectly into place. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just the steady unraveling of his inflated ego in plain sight. His embarrassment was palpable, a sharp contrast to the confident, smug man who had publicly humiliated me just weeks ago. And yet, the sweetest part was not his discomfort. It was the realization, quiet and inevitable, that I had orchestrated it all. Every observation, every subtle manipulation, every carefully timed word had led to this moment. My revenge was not born of cruelty, but of precision, patience, and the quiet power of intellect. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and, most importantly, my control. Later that night, as I stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the satisfaction washed over me like a warm tide. I no longer felt the sting of humiliation from the birthday party. It had been transformed into a weapon, honed and delivered with care. The storm that had brewed inside me for so long was finally spent, leaving only a calm clarity and a profound sense of liberation. I realized with a bittersweet smile that revenge is sweetest not when it is loud or vengeful, but when it is subtle, controlled, and undeniable. The man who had sought to diminish me had been undone not by rage, but by patience, intelligence, and a quiet determination to reclaim my dignity. And as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I understood something essential. Betrayal may wound, but it can also awaken strength, cunning, and resolve. I had been pushed to the edge, but in rising from it, I had become unstoppable. The mask I wore had served its purpose, but now I no longer needed it. I had the power, the clarity, and the satisfaction of knowing that respect, once denied, had been returned, not by confrontation, but by the quiet, inexorable force of deliberate, sweet revenge.